Hello. In this video, we'll be taking a look at risk-based access and diving into Microsoft's Entra ID Protection technology. We'll be covering some of its features and capabilities, and then stepping through some sample configuration options. My name is Adam Clifford. I'm an IT consultant and a Microsoft certified trainer, specializing in the Microsoft modern work and security space. Let's get started. When we talk about risk-based access through the lens of Entra ID protection, essentially what we're trying to do is gain confidence in the legitimacy of our sign-ins. Instead of simply asking, did the user enter the right credentials and did they satisfy our MFA requirements, we're going to look at some other data points. Microsoft collects a ton of information on the current threat landscape and known bad actors. We're going to look for any links between those activities and the user of the sign-in. We're also going to look at user behavior analysis and look at the agent string, the device, the IP address that the user is coming from, and comparing that to a baseline of typical devices and locations that a user signs in from. Once we have both of those pieces of information, we can assign a risk level to the user and to the sign-in, and we can use that risk level to make decisions on whether we allow that sign-in to continue, whether we deny it, or we allow it to continue, but only if the user is able to validate their identity through a couple of other mechanisms. So what raises the risk level for a user? Number one is leaked credentials. Microsoft is always looking on the dark web, looking for matches of UPNs and current password hashes with data breaches and dumps on the dark web. This doesn't necessarily mean that your organization had an exfiltration, but a lot of times it's password reuse. I go to website Y, sign up for an account to download some software, a newsletter, and I use the same credentials. They have a cyber event, right? And now, because of password reuse, my credentials may potentially be on the dark web. We're going to look at the source of the sign-in, and does that coincide with an IP that's known to be linked to a Tor exit node or a VPN egress point? Anything that would typically be used to mask the original source. We're looking at impossible travel. If I sign in from Green Bay at noon and Chicago at 1 o'clock, is it possible for me to have made that trip within the window of the two login events? We're going to take signals from Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Office. Was the user involved in a phishing suspected phishing event earlier in the day, or do I see a malware alert on one of their endpoints? If so, that's going to dramatically raise the risk level for that user. And any other kind of suspicious anomalies or other things that we don't typically see. There's a ton of information that Microsoft doesn't release on exactly what they look for, but a lot of it is going to be based off departures from typical behavior. Risky sign-ins, likewise, again, coming from IPs or devices that haven't been seen before from that user. Microsoft collects a list of locations and IPs that are common, and when we start seeing new devices or new locations, that's going to raise the risk a little bit there. Again, is there a password spray attack going on? Do I see multiple repeated failed logins from different IP addresses, or multiple different passwords coming from the same IP? Anything that would indicate that I should have a little bit of additional scrutiny on this login. Finally, just to point out, to take advantage of this, this is an Azure AD P2 license feature. So if you have Microsoft 365 E5, you're covered. If you have F3 and the F5 step up, Security E5, or EMS E5, currently all of those bundles or the standalone P2 license will cover you for this feature. Now let's dive into Azure and take a look at some of the configs. All right, here we are in the Entra panel. If you scroll down on the left-hand side under protection, we're in the identity protection pane. And there are two policies are right here, the user risk and the sign-in risk. Now, you'll see this tooltip is already recommending that we migrate from policy enforcement to conditional access. We'll take a look at conditional access here in a moment and the differences, but essentially we can be a lot more flexible and targeted with CA than what we can do with the legacy policies. The policies are pretty simple. We scope our users, we set our risk level, and then we have our control. So if they're a high risk level, we block them, we allow them with a password change. There's no way to say only for this specific app or for these other conditions. So again, still really powerful, better than nothing. But when it comes to conditional access, we just have a lot more control. Very similar on the risky sign-in. If we're at low and above, for example, I'm going to allow access but require again a MFA step up. Pulling over to conditional access and looking at our policies, you'll see I have these two down here, risky sign-ins and risky users. Now, one thing to point out is that these conditional access policies do stack. So we don't have to create a ton of them for all these specific use cases. As long as we're smart about how we craft our conditional access policies, we can have some very powerful options with just a small number of layered policies. For example, I have my standard MFA policy that requires MFA on all logins, but I also then have my medium and high level risk policies that will layer on top of and only trigger when the additional criteria are met. The only thing we have to be careful on layered policies is making sure that we don't have contradicting policies. So if I log in and I'm a high risk user and I have a policy set to deny that, and I have another one that says allow but require a password change for the same application, I cannot satisfy both of those outcomes, and so it will default to block. So one very powerful tool is the what if analyzer, where we can come in here and say, hey, if user X is logging into application Y, they're coming from this IP, their risk level is this, their device is managed by Intune, what policies will apply to them if they were to log in? We can see very clearly which ones will target, and if policies don't target, what criteria is missing that's preventing that policy from applying. So whenever you make changes in here, setting them to report only mode to start out with, coming over into what if, running through the simulator is a great way to kind of do a sanity check on our conditional access policies before putting them into effect. May do another video on layered conditional access, but for now, let's take a look at the risky sign-ins. So one thing you'll notice right when we come up is very similar to, at first, the policy enforcement, where we scope our users, and then we can set our action. But we also have some additional capabilities. I can say that, hey, this policy applies to all applications. If I have a subset of apps that contain sensitive information, maybe my CRM, my data warehouse, ERP system, anything of that nature that has PCI, PHI, confidential trade secret, any data that I really care about, I can treat that differently. Where I may say, if you're a high risk user and you're trying to get into most of our applications, I will let you revalidate your identity and get in. But these 4 applications are the crown jewels, and you'll need to open a ticket. We need to find out why your risk level is elevated, and an admin needs to clear that before we'll allow you to proceed. There's also some additional conditions that we can look at. So we can say, hey, if your risk level is high on a sign-in, um, we're going to take certain action. But if you're coming from our egress IP, we may want to treat that differently. Um, or if I'm using a thick client that's capable of downloading and caching information offline, I may take different actions than if it's just a browser based, or treat mobile devices differently, especially if they're managed by Intune. So it's not just the users scope to all applications. I can get very granular looking at IP location, platform. This is where I would come in also and say what risk levels apply. In this case, it's medium or high. So I do have a lot of, again, ways to be very surgical in how I apply these policies. So we have our requirements. Let's look at some of the access options. So you can see here, I am granting access, but instead of just requiring MFA, which we do all the time, um, I am requiring a stronger level of MFA. So we have not all MFA methods are created equal. Some, like phone call, just hit pound to approve. Formally authenticator was just tap to approve. Duo can still be configured that way. Whenever I have to take data from one device onto another, whether it's a 6-digit code from SMS or the number matching on MFA, you're adding an additional confidence level there that the user is taking some time. They're looking at both devices, and it's not just a prompt bomb at 3 in the morning that someone finally just hits approve on the MFA request just to make it stop so they can get back to sleep. There been several examples of MFA bypass attacks on recent security incidents that have come down to the overuse of MFA notifications, or not requiring a strong enough MFA method. So I can require, in this case, I'm doing passwordless. So, the number matching on the phone along with a biometric gesture, the 3D scan from my iPhone. Even stronger is I can require a FIDO2 compliant device. So whether that's a YubiKey that I'll tap and enter a PIN code in, or Auth-Trends, or I know YubiKey has a biometric version now as well, where I tap it and do a fingerprint read. So again, something that I have, something that I am, or something that I know, makes it again very difficult to capture and interpret that or intercept that MFA prompt. The other thing that we can do that's different here is modify the sign-in frequency. So as you all know, when I sign into Azure AD for the first time, or any app that's federated against it for authentication, I'm issued a PRT, a primary refresh ticket or token, and that spawns off my access token that gets reevaluated every couple hours. By setting the sign-in frequency, I don't have to wait for that token to expire for it to reevaluate and see if my account is still in good standing or what my risk level is. So by setting the frequency, what I can say is, hey, if my user account is now at high risk, or my sign-in is now at high risk, I'm going to immediately trigger the action of requiring the higher level of MFA, or or as long as the user account continues to be at high risk, every time they go to they access, or they go to log in, they're going to have to complete the MFA process, the MFA step up. So again, just giving me some tighter controls over how often that happens. And if I don't want it every time, I can set it to be every hour. I want that to reevaluate. So if certain apps don't handle that SSO, that access token extraordinarily well, we can still have tight controls without an endless, MFA prompt sequence over and over. But again, that's been pretty rare in my experience. So if we go back and we look at this was the risky sign-ins, we are going to see that risky users is set up very, very similarly. Our condition now, though, is going to be at the user risk. I am going to grant, but in this time, I'm still going to require a stronger level of MFA, but I'm also going to require a password change. On risky users, this is a great idea, especially as with a common way that user risk score gets elevated as we talked about leaked credentials on the dark web. So if I know for a fact that that password hash is out there, and there are ways to reverse that hash with the UPN, I want the user to rotate their password, something that they hopefully is not out there on the dark web. So again, very, very similar. And again, I can scope my policy exactly like on the risky sign-in. I can, target specific apps. Again, if it's they're logging into a crown jewel application, your risk level is too high. Everything else, you can do a password reset. You can remediate your own risk. But here, for these applications, we want this to be treated a little bit differently. And again, just like with the sign-in, we do have the sign-in frequency set to every time so that it does trigger on the next login once that, as soon as that risk detection rises above the threshold that we have set. So as you can see, the conditional access policies cover quite a bit more ground than the policy-based definitions. So again, if this is something that you're using today, that's awesome. But it may be time or should be time to start looking at moving over to conditional access. And again, if you have Azure AD P2 today, or sorry, Entra ID P2, this is a technology that can be implemented without a ton of time investment that can just have a huge payoff as far as strengthening our security posture. All right, that's all I have for you in this video. Hope it was informative and you learned something, and please feel free to leave any questions in a comment and I will do my best to respond. Thank you.